The Banda Islands are a volcanic group of 10 small volcanic islands in the Banda Sea, about 140 kilometers south of Seram Island and about 2,000 kilometers east of Java, and are part of the Indonesian province of Maluku. The main town and administrative center is Banda, located on the island of the same name. They rise out of 4 to 6 kilometer deep ocean and have a total land area of approximately 180 square kilometers. They have a population of about 15,000. Until the mid-19th century, the Banda Islands were the world's only source of the spices nutmeg and mace, produced from the nutmeg tree. The islands are also popular destinations for scuba diving and snorkeling. History. Pre-European history. The first documented human presence in the Banda Islands comes from a rock shelter site on Pulau that was in use at least 8,000 years ago. Before the arrival of Europeans, Banda had an oligarchic form of government led by Orange Kaya, and the Bandanese had an active and independent role in trade throughout the archipelago. Banda was the world's only source of nutmeg and mace, spices used as flavorings, medicines, and preserving agents that were at the time highly valued in European markets. They were sold by Arab traders to the Venetians for exorbitant prices. The traders did not divulge the exact location of their source, and no European was able to deduce their location. The first written accounts of Banda are in Suma Oriental, a book written by the Portuguese apothecary Tomé Perez, who was based in Malacca from 1512 to 1515 but visited Banda several times. On his first visit, he interviewed the Portuguese and the far more knowledgeable Malay sailors in Malacca. He estimated the early 16th century population to be 2500–3000. He reported the Bandanese as being part of an Indonesia-wide trading network and the only native Malucan long-range traders taking cargo to Malacca, although shipments from Banda were also being made by Javanese traders. In addition to the production of nutmeg and mace, Banda maintained significant entrepot trade. Goods that moved through Banda included cloves from Ternate and Tidore in the north, bird of paradise feathers from the Aru Islands and western New Guinea, masoi bark for traditional medicines, and slaves. In exchange, Banda predominantly received rice and cloth, namely light cotton batik from Java, calicos from India and ikat from the Lesser Sundis. In 1603, an average quality sarong-sized cloth traded for 18 kilograms of nutmeg. Some of these textiles were then on-sold, ending up in Halmahera and New Guinea. Corso ikat from the Lesser Sundis was traded for sago from the Kei Islands, Aru and Seram. Portuguese. In August 1511, on behalf of the King of Portugal, Afonso de Albuquerque conquered Malacca, which at the time was the hub of Asian trade. In November of that year, after having secured Malacca and learning of the Banda's location, Albuquerque sent an expedition of 3 ships led by his good friend Antonio de Abreu to find them. Malay pilots, either recruited or forcibly conscripted, guided them via Java, the Lesser Sundis and Ambon to Banda, arriving in early 1512. The first Europeans to reach the Bandas, the expedition remained in Banda for about 1 month, purchasing and filling their ships with Banda's nutmeg and mace, and with cloves, in which Banda had a thriving entrepot trade. De Abreu sailed through Ambon and Seram while his second-in-command Francisco Serrao went ahead towards the Maluku Islands, was shipwrecked and ended up in Ternate. Distracted by hostilities elsewhere in the archipelago, such as Ambon and Ternate, the Portuguese did not return until 1529. A Portuguese trader, Captain Garcia Henriques, landed troops in the Bandas. 5 of the Banda Islands were within gunshot of each other, and he realized that a fort on the main island Nara would give him full control of the group. The Bandanese were, however, hostile to such a plan, and their warlike antics were both costly and tiresome to Garcia, whose men were attacked when they attempted to build a fort. From then on, the Portuguese were infrequent visitors to the islands, preferring to buy their nutmeg from traders in Malacca. Unlike other eastern Indonesian islands, such as Ambon, Solor, Ternate and Morotai, the Bandanese displayed no enthusiasm for Christianity or the Europeans who brought it in the 16th century, and no serious attempt was made to Christianize the Bandanese. Maintaining their independence, the Bandanese never allowed the Portuguese to build a fort or a permanent post in the islands. Ironically though, it was this lack of ports which brought the Dutch to trade at Banda instead of the Clove Islands of Ternate and Tidore. Coming of the Dutch followed the Portuguese to Banda but were to have a much more dominating and lasting presence. Dutch-Bandanese relations were mutually resentful from the outset, with Holland's first merchants complaining of Bandanese reneging on agreed deliveries and price, and cheating on quantity and quality. For the Bandanese, on the other hand, although they welcomed another competitor purchaser for their spices, the items of trade offered by the Dutch, heavy woolens, and damasks, unwanted manufactured goods, for example, were usually unsuitable in comparison to traditional trade products. The Javanese, Arab and Indian, and Portuguese traders, for example, brought indispensable items along with steel knives, copper, medicines and prized Chinese porcelain. As much as the Dutch disliked dealing with the Bandanese, the trade was a highly profitable one, with spices selling for 300 times the purchase price in Banda. This amply justified the expense and risk in shipping them to Europe. The allure of such profits saw an increasing number of Dutch expeditions. It was soon seen that in trade with the East Indies, competition from each would eat into all their profits. Thus the competitors united to form the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie. Until the early 17th century the Bandis were ruled by a group of leading citizens, the Orange Kaya. Each of these was a head of district. At the time nutmeg was one of the fine spices, kept expensive in Europe by disciplined manipulation of the market, but a desirable commodity for Dutch traders in the ports of India as well. Economic historian Fernand Braudel notes that India consumed twice as much as Europe. A number of Banda's Orange Kaya were persuaded by the Dutch to sign a treaty granting the Dutch a monopoly on spice purchases. Even though the Bandanese had little understanding of the significance of the treaty known as the Eternal Compact, or that not all Bandanese leaders had signed, it would later be used to justify Dutch troops being brought in to defend their monopoly. The Bandanese soon grew tired of the Dutch actions, the low prices, the useless trade items, and the enforcement of Dutch sole rights to the purchase of the coveted spices. The end of the line for the Bandanese came in 1609 when the Dutch constructed Fort Nassau on Banda Island. The Orange Kaya called a meeting with the Dutch admiral and 40 of his highest-ranking men and ambushed and killed them all. English-Dutch rivalry while Portuguese and Spanish activity in the region had weakened. The English had built fortified trading posts on tiny Iron Run Islands, 10 to 20 kilometers from the main Banda Islands. With the British paying higher prices, they were significantly undermining Dutch aims for a monopoly. As Anglo-Dutch tensions increased in 1611, the Dutch built the larger and more strategic Fort Belgica above Fort Nassau. In 1615, the Dutch invaded with 900 men, whereupon the English retreated to Run where they regrouped. That same night, the English launched a surprise counter-attack on retaking the island and killing 200 Dutchmen. A year later, a much stronger Dutch force attacked This time the defenders were able to hold off the attack with cannon fire, but after a month of siege they ran out of ammunition. The Dutch slaughtered the defenders, and afterwards strengthened the fort, renaming it Fort Revenge. Massacre of the Bandanese. Newly appointed VOC Governor-General Jan Pieterse on Cohen set about enforcing Dutch monopoly over the Banda's spice trade. In 1621 well-armed soldiers were landed on Banda Island, and within a few days they had also occupied neighbouring and larger Lontar. The Orange Kailer were forced at gunpoint to sign an unfeasibly arduous treaty, one that was in fact impossible to keep, thus providing Cohen an excuse to use superior Dutch force against the Bandanese. The Dutch quickly noted a number of alleged violations of the new treaty, in response to which Cohen launched a punitive massacre. Japanese mercenaries were hired to deal with the Orange Kailer, 40 of whom were beheaded with their heads impaled and displayed on bamboo spears. The population of the Banda Islands prior to Dutch conquest is generally estimated to have been around 13,000–15,000 people, some of whom were Malay and Javanese traders, as well as Chinese and Arabs. The actual numbers of Bandanese who were killed, forcibly expelled or fled the islands in 1621 remain uncertain, but readings of historical sources suggest around 1,000 Bandanese likely survived in the islands, and were spread throughout the nutmeg groves as forced laborers. The Dutch subsequently resettled the islands with imported slaves, convicts and indentured laborers, as well as immigrants from elsewhere in Indonesia. Most survivors fled as refugees to the islands of their trading partners, in particular Kefing and Guli-Guli in the Seram Island chain and Kei Besar. Shipments of surviving Bandanese were also sent to Batavia to work as slaves in developing the city and its fortress. Some 530 of these individuals were later returned to the islands because of their much-needed expertise in nutmeg cultivation, whereas, up until this point, the Dutch presence had been simply as traders, that was sometimes treaty-based. The Banda conquest marked the start of the first overt colonial rule in Indonesia, albeit under the auspices of the VOC monopoly having nearly eradicated the island's native population. Cohen divided the productive land of approximately 500,000 nutmeg trees into 68 1.2-hectare per con. These land parcels were then handed to Dutch planters known as perkeniers, of which 34 were on Lontar, 31 on I and 3 on Nera. With few Bandanese left to work them, slaves from elsewhere were brought in. Now enjoying control of the nutmeg production, the VOC paid the perkeniers 1/122 of the Dutch market price for nutmeg. However, the perkeniers still profited immensely, building substantial villas with opulent imported European decorations. The outlying island of Run was harder for the VOC to control, and they exterminated all nutmeg trees there. The production and export of nutmeg was a VOC monopoly for almost 200 years. Fort Belgica, one of many forts built by the Dutch East India Company, is one of the largest remaining European forts in Indonesia. English-Dutch rivalry continues. European control of the Bandas was contested up until 1667 when, under the Treaty of Breda, the English traded the small island of Run for Manhattan, giving the Dutch full control of the Banda archipelago. In 1810, the Kingdom of Holland was a vassal of Napoleonic France and hence in conflict with Britain. The French and British were each seeking to control lucrative Indian Ocean trade routes. On 10 May 1810, a squadron consisting of the 36-gun frigate HMS Caroline, formerly French frigate HMS Piedmontes, 18-gun sloop HMS Barracuda, and the 12-gun transport HMS Mandarin left Madras with money, supplies and troops to support the garrison at Amboina, recently captured from the Dutch. The frigates and sloop carried 100 officers and men of the Madras European Regiment, while the Mandarin carried supplies. The squadron was commanded by Captain Christopher Cole, with Captain Charles Foote on the Piedmontes and Captain Richard Kenner aboard the Barracuda. After departing from Madras, Cole informed Foote and Kenner of Cole's plan to capture the Bandas. Foote and Kenner agreed. In Singapore, Captain Spencer informed Cole that over 700 regular Dutch troops may be located in the Bandas. The squadron took a circuitous route to avoid alerting the Dutch. On 9 August 1810, the British appeared at Banda Nera. They quickly stormed the island and attacked Belgica Castle at sunrise. The battle was over within hours. with the Dutch surrendering Fort Nassau after some subterfuge, and within days the remainder of the Banda Islands. After the Dutch surrender, Captain Charles Foote was appointed Lieutenant Governor of the Banda Islands. This action was a prelude to Britain's invasion of Java in 1811. Before the Dutch retook control of the islands, the British removed many nutmeg trees and transplanted them to Ceylon and other British colonies. The competition largely destroyed the value of the Banda Islands to the Dutch. Recent history in the late 1990s. Violence between Christians and Muslims and between indigenous locals and transmigrants spilled over from intercommunal conflict in Ambon. The disturbance and resulting deaths damaged the previously prosperous tourism industry. Geography. There are 7 inhabited islands and several that are uninhabited. The inhabited islands are: Main Group, Banda Nera, or Naira, the island with the administrative capital and a small airfield. Present on Banda Nera is Fort Belgica, one of the largest remaining Dutch forts that are still intact in Indonesia. Banda API, an active volcano with a peak of about 650 meters. Banda Besar is the largest island, 12 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide. It has 3 main settlements, Lunthwa, Selamon and Waer. Some distance to the west, Pulauai or Pulauai. Pulau runs further west again. In the 17th century, this island was involved in an exchange between the British and the Dutch for the island of Manhattan in New York. To the east, Pulau Pisang, also known as Sayahir. To the southeast, Pulau Hatta, formerly Rosengain or Rosingen. Others, possibly small or uninhabited, are Nailaka, a short distance northeast of Pulau Run. Batu Kapal, Maluku, an active volcano. Pulau Karakar or Pulau Karaka, Manukang. Hatta Reef. The islands are part of the Banda Sea Islands moist deciduous forest ecoregion. Bandanese culture. Most of the present-day inhabitants of the Banda Islands are descended from migrants and plantation laborers from various parts of Indonesia, as well as from indigenous Bandanese. They have inherited aspects of pre-colonial ritual practices in the Bandis that are highly valued and still performed, giving them a distinct and very local cultural identity. In addition, Bandanese speak a distinct dialect of Malay language which has several features distinguishing it from Ambonese Malay, the better-known and more widespread dialect that forms a lingua franca in central and southeast Maluku. Bandanese Malay is famous in the region for its unique, lilting accent, but it also has a number of locally identifying words in its lexicon, many of them borrowings or loan words from Dutch. Examples: fork, forok, ant, mere, spoon, leap, difficult, lastek, floor, pleur, porch, stoop. Banda Malay shares many Portuguese loan words with Ambonese Malay not appearing in the national language, Indonesian, but it has comparatively fewer, and they differ in pronunciation. Examples: turtle, tetaruga, totaruga, throat, gargantong, gargantang. Finally, and most noticeably, Banda Malay uses some distinct pronouns. The most immediately distinguishing is that of the second-person singular familiar form of address, pane. The descendants of some of the Bandanese who fled Dutch conquest in the 17th century live in the Kai Islands to the east of the Banda group, where a version of the original Banda language is still spoken in the villages of Banda Eli and Banda Relate on Kai Besar Island. While long integrated into Kai Island society, residents of these settlements continue to value the historical origins of their ancestors.